It's impossible. It's impossible.
How do you capture lightning in a bottle? How do you take a life lived in turmoil, passion, and explosive creativity and translate it onto a cinema screen?
The mower, is he imaginary? There's no one in that field.
Oh, that's just any man struggling in the heat to finish his work.
Few lives have been as mythologized as that of Vincent van Gogh, the tortured genius, the misunderstood visionary, the artist who saw the world not as it was, but as he felt it.
I have a feeling of being surer of my brush than ever before.
In 1956, at the height of Hollywood's golden age, director Vincente Minnelli and star Kirk Douglas attempted the impossible: to bring this life to the screen in the film Lust for Life. It was a project of immense ambition, a biopic that refused to be just a simple life story. It aimed to be a work of art about a work of art. But the film became something more than just a movie. It became a cultural event that would forever shape the public's perception of Van Gogh. It was a production filled with artistic rebellion, obsessive dedication, and a performance so intense it blurred the line between actor and character. Today, we're peeling back the canvas to reveal the story behind the story. We're counting down the 10 incredible facts about Lust for Life that connect it to the raw, vibrant, and often painful reality of its subject. We will explore the authentic locations, the artistic choices that defied a studio, and the historical truths and inaccuracies that cemented a legend. Number 10. The role that had to be fought for. It's almost impossible now to imagine anyone but Kirk Douglas as Vincent van Gogh. His performance is so iconic it feels like it was destined. But the role of the tormented Dutch painter was never intended for him. In fact, MGM, the studio behind the film, had a very different and much safer actor in mind, Spencer Tracy. MGM had originally purchased the rights to Irving Stone's novel Lust for Life as a vehicle for Tracy, one of the biggest and most respected stars of his generation. But the project languished in development for years. Meanwhile, Kirk Douglas, an actor known for his explosive energy, had become fascinated with Van Gogh. People had often told him he bore a striking physical resemblance to the artist, and after seeing Van Gogh's paintings, Douglas felt a deep personal connection to his struggle and passion. He actively and relentlessly pursued the role. The studio was hesitant. Douglas was a star, but he was known for playing tough, virile, often aggressive characters. Could he truly embody the vulnerability and inner turmoil of Van Gogh? Douglas, along with director Vincente Minnelli and producer John Houseman, formed a united front. They were convinced that he was the only actor who could capture the artist's fiery spirit. They stood firm against the studio's initial vision, and eventually they won. This initial casting battle was the first sign that this would be no ordinary Hollywood biopic. It was a passion project from the beginning, driven by artists who were willing to fight for their vision of authenticity over safe, predictable stardom. Number 9. A director's rebellion against the big screen. In the 1950s, Hollywood was in a war with a new enemy: television. To lure audiences out of their homes, studios relied on spectacle. The biggest weapon in their arsenal was CinemaScope, the epic, ultra-wide format that made movies feel larger than life. It was the standard for any major MGM production, but director Vincente Minnelli knew it would be a disaster for Lust for Life. Minnelli argued passionately against using CinemaScope. His reasoning was simple and brilliant. Vincent van Gogh didn't paint in widescreen. Minnelli felt the wide aspect ratio was completely incompatible with the intimate, often claustrophobic nature of Van Gogh's work. It would, in his words, spoil the intimacy of the scenes that were meant to reflect the artist's personal and emotional world. How could you authentically capture the feeling of a small room in Arles or a cramped asylum cell on a screen designed for chariot races? His rebellion didn't stop there. He also rejected the dominant color film stocks of the era like Technicolor and Eastman color, which he felt produced overly saturated, candy box-like colors. He wanted a more subdued, nuanced palette that could reflect the changing moods of Van Gogh's life and art. He insisted on using Ansco color, a lesser-known film stock with softer, more natural tones. The problem? It was basically out of production. In an extraordinary move, MGM was forced to buy the very last remaining stock of Ansco color film in the world and set up a special lab just to process it for the film. This wasn't just a technical choice, it was a profound artistic statement. Minnelli was fighting to make the film's visual language, its very DNA, as faithful to Van Gogh's spirit as possible. Number 8. Painting a universe of 200 masterpieces. If you're going to make a film about Vincent van Gogh, you need his paintings. Not just a few, but enough to fill his world. The production of Lust for Life undertook a monumental task, the reproduction of around 200 of Van Gogh's paintings. This wasn't a matter of just printing posters. Each piece had to be a convincing three-dimensional object that Kirk Douglas could interact with and that could be filmed from any angle. The job fell to an American artist named Richard Parker. He painstakingly recreated each work, capturing the texture, the energy, and the famous impasto, the thick application of paint that defined Van Gogh's style. But the real innovation was how they photographed them. To ensure the colors on screen were as vibrant and true to the originals as possible, MGM employed a new photographic technique. They printed the reproductions using direct negatives, a process that allowed for an unprecedented level of color accuracy and intensity. This attention to detail meant that the paintings in the film weren't just props, they were active characters. Director Vincente Minnelli used them to drive the story. The film's color palette was meticulously designed to mirror Van Gogh's artistic journey, shifting with his moods and locations. We see the grim, gray, and earthy tones of his early work in the Borinage mining region, which then explode into the vibrant reds and yellows of his time in Paris and Arles. The film doesn't just tell you that Van Gogh is a genius, it shows you, by immersing you in his visual world. Number 7. Walking in Van Gogh's footsteps. In an era when Hollywood often recreated the world on a studio backlot, the makers of Lust for Life embarked on a pilgrimage. They chose to film in the actual places where Vincent van Gogh lived, worked, and died. This commitment to authenticity was revolutionary for a biopic of its time, and gives the film a profound sense of place and history. The production traveled to the Borinage, the bleak coal mining district in Belgium, where Van Gogh first tried to find his purpose as a missionary. The desolate landscapes seen in the film are the very same that inspired his early somber drawings. They went to Arles, the sun-drenched town in the south of France, where his art exploded with color. There, they constructed a perfect replica of his famous Yellow House, the place he dreamed of turning into an artist's colony. Most poignantly, they filmed in Auvers-sur-Oise, the quiet village where Van Gogh spent his last 70 days. The final scenes of the film were the first to be shot. Kirk Douglas walked the same fields, stood under the same skies, and painted in the very locations that inspired some of Van Gogh's final frantic masterpieces, like Wheatfield with Crows. To add to the realism, many of the local villagers from Auvers-sur-Oise were hired as extras, participating in scenes of Bastille Day celebrations and filling the local cafes. This wasn't just a film set, it was a living history. This dedication to place grounds the film's high drama in a tangible reality, allowing the audience to feel as if they are not just watching a story, but breathing the same air as the artist himself. Number 6. The 22-minute Oscar. Every great protagonist needs a great foil. For Vincent van Gogh, that was Paul Gauguin, the fellow post-impressionist painter who was his friend, his roommate, his artistic rival, and ultimately a catalyst for his most famous breakdown. In Lust for Life, this complex figure was brought to life by Anthony Quinn in a performance that is a masterclass in screen presence. Quinn's portrayal of Gauguin is magnetic. He's arrogant, pragmatic, and fiercely opinionated, a stark contrast to Van Gogh's raw, unfiltered emotionality. Their scenes together crackle with intellectual and emotional energy. They argue about art, life, and the very nature of reality. And we watch as their friendship of mutual admiration curdles into a toxic rivalry that culminates in the infamous ear-cutting incident. Quinn's performance was so powerful, so impactful, that he won the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor. What makes this achievement legendary is that he did it with only 22 minutes of total screen time. It's one of the shortest performances ever to win an Oscar, a testament to his incredible ability to command the screen. However, this is also where the film takes one of its biggest dramatic liberties. For the sake of drama, the movie portrays Gauguin as a somewhat one-sided, quarrelsome figure whose departure directly causes Van Gogh's spiral. The real relationship was far more complex and artistically conflicted, but Quinn's larger-than-life performance perfectly served the film's narrative, creating a powerful, understandable trigger for the tragedy to come. He may not have been the complete historical Gauguin, but he was exactly the Gauguin the story needed.
Number 5. We don't play weak queers. Kirk Douglas's performance was a revelation, but it was also a risk, especially in the hyper-masculine culture of 1950s Hollywood. He wasn't playing a hero. He was playing a man plagued by doubt, failure, and overwhelming emotion. And not everyone in the old guard of Hollywood understood it. There is a famous and very revealing anecdote that Douglas himself loved to tell. He ran into the legendary John Wayne shortly after the film was released. Wayne, the ultimate symbol of rugged American masculinity, was horrified by his portrayal. He told Douglas, "Kirk, how could you play a part like that? There's so goddamn few of us left. We gotta play strong, tough characters, not those weak queers." Douglas, taken aback, tried to explain, "Hey, it's make-believe, John. It's not real. You're not really John Wayne, you know." This brief exchange speaks volumes. It perfectly captures the cultural clash the film represented. In an era where male movie stars were expected to be stoic, decisive, and in control, Douglas dared to portray a man who was the exact opposite. His Van Gogh was vulnerable, needy, and emotionally unstable, a portrait of a masculinity that was rarely, if ever, seen on screen. Wayne's comment, though crude and dated, reveals just how radical Douglas's performance was. He wasn't just playing an artist, he was challenging the very definition of what a leading man could be. He chose psychological truth over heroic fantasy, and in doing so, he created a character that felt more real and human than 100 cowboys. And now, the golden flicker moment. Number 4. Method in the madness. For our golden flicker moment, that one element of a film's creation that shines so brightly it reveals the true heart of the project. For Lust for Life, it was Kirk Douglas's terrifying, all-consuming transformation into Vincent van Gogh. This was more than just a performance. It was a complete immersion, a journey into the soul of the artist that took a profound personal toll. Douglas's physical preparation was intense. He not only resembled Van Gogh, but he altered himself to heighten that resemblance. He grew a beard and had his hair cut and dyed to match the artist's fiery reddish tint. He took painting lessons to ensure that when he held a brush, it looked believable. He wanted to understand the physical act of creation that drove Van Gogh. But the real transformation was internal. Douglas plunged himself into the abyss of Van Gogh's unstable personality.
He was portraying a man of extreme highs and devastating lows, and he lived in that headspace for the duration of the shoot. His performance became so intense, so inseparable from his own personality, that it began to frighten those around him, including his own wife, who said she was scared by the man he became off-set. Douglas himself later admitted that he could never go that deep into a character again, saying, "I was closer to going insane in that role than in any other." He felt the torment of Van Gogh so profoundly that it took him a long time to shake it off. This total immersion resulted in the powerful, tortured genius portrayal that has defined Van Gogh in the public imagination for decades. And yet, this is also the film's most significant and controversial historical legacy. While dramatically effective, this portrayal emphasizes Van Gogh's instability above all else. More recent scholarship has painted a different picture, that of a highly intelligent, thoughtful, and deliberate artist who was fluent in multiple languages and had a deep understanding of art history. His psychological struggles were very real, but they were not the entirety of his being. The film, through Douglas's incredible performance, cemented the myth of the mad artist, whose genius was a direct result of his suffering. It's a romantic and compelling narrative, but it oversimplifies a complex man. Kirk Douglas didn't just play Vincent van Gogh. In a way, he created the modern version of him in our collective culture, a powerful, enduring, but not entirely accurate icon.
Number 3. A critical darling, a box office failure. With its stellar performances, artistic integrity, and deep emotional power, Lust for Life seemed destined for success, and in many ways it was. The film was showered with critical acclaim. The reviews were glowing. Kirk Douglas won the Golden Globe for Best Actor and was nominated for an Oscar. Anthony Quinn, as we know, took home the Oscar for his supporting role. The film was recognized as a towering artistic achievement. But the praise of critics doesn't always translate to ticket sales. Despite its awards and acclaim, Lust for Life was a financial failure. The film's production was expensive, with its European location shoots and meticulous artistic demands. It ended up losing about $2 million for MGM, a significant sum in 1956. Why did it fail to connect with a wider audience? The subject matter was dark, intense, and psychologically complex. It was a story about suffering, failure, and mental illness, without a traditionally happy Hollywood ending. In the 1950s, audiences were more accustomed to musicals, westerns, and grand historical epics. A grim, art house-style biopic, no matter how brilliant, was a tough sell. The film's fate highlights the timeless conflict between art and commerce in Hollywood. MGM took a huge risk on a difficult, uncompromising film and created an enduring classic. But it was a classic that proved too dark and too challenging for the mainstream tastes of its time. Number 2. The Hollywood Melodrama Filter. To tell a complex life story in 2 hours, choices have to be made. Things are compressed, characters are combined, and nuance is often sacrificed for clarity and emotional impact. Lust for Life is a powerful film, but it is not a documentary. It views Van Gogh's life through the distinct filter of 1950s Hollywood melodrama. Critics and historians then and now have pointed out the film's historical liberties. The narrative heavily emphasizes Van Gogh's emotional extremes, framing his life as a relentless series of dramatic breakdowns. This creates a compelling story, but as we've discussed, it oversimplifies the nuances of his personality and his mental health, which was likely a complex mix of conditions, not just a singular madness. The film also omits or downplays key figures in his life. The most significant omission is his sister-in-law, Johanna van Gogh Bonger. After Vincent and her husband Theo died, it was Johanna who single-handedly preserved Vincent's massive collection of paintings and letters. She dedicated her life to promoting his work, curating exhibitions, and publishing his correspondence. Without her, Vincent van Gogh might have been forgotten by history.
but she is completely absent from the film, which focuses solely on the relationship between the two brothers. Even critics in 1956 recognized these trade-offs. They acknowledged the film's historical errors and its tendency to romanticize certain aspects of Van Gogh's life, but for the most part, they forgave these flaws, arguing that the film should be judged as an emotional biopic rather than a strict historical record. They were won over by its passion, its visual beauty, and its powerful performances, accepting the creative license as a necessary part of creating a compelling cinematic experience. Number 1. Cementing a myth. What is the ultimate legacy of a great biopic? Is it to be a perfectly accurate record of a life? Or is it to capture the spirit of that life so powerfully that it becomes immortal? The single most important fact about Lust for Life is that for millions of people, for multiple generations, it solved the mystery of Vincent van Gogh. It took a complex, often contradictory historical figure and gave him a clear, powerful, and deeply human face. The film's portrayal of the tortured artist pouring his pain and passion onto the canvas became the definitive version of his story. For countless people, their introduction to Van Gogh's art was through the lens of Kirk Douglas's performance. He didn't just play Van Gogh, he became him in the cultural consciousness. Despite its historical inaccuracies, the film accomplished something extraordinary. It took the story of a then-still niche artist and broadcast it to a massive global audience, solidifying his place as not just a great painter, but as an archetypal figure, the ultimate symbol of the misunderstood genius who suffers for his art. The film's title, Lust for Life, became a perfect summary of his spirit. A relentless, desperate craving for life, beauty, and expression, even in the face of overwhelming darkness. It is a beautiful, powerful, and romantic myth, and like all great myths, it contains a profound truth, even if it gets some of the facts wrong. The film is a landmark of the biopic genre, a testament to the obsessive passion of its creators, and a cultural artifact that proves sometimes the legend is just as important as the life. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the art and soul of Lust for Life. If you discovered something new today and were captivated by the story behind this classic film, let us know by showing your support. Give this video a like to help it reach more film lovers. Subscribe to Golden Flicker and hit the notification bell so you never miss a countdown. And for our question today, let us know in the comments, what do you think is the most important role of a biopic? Historical accuracy or emotional truth? We can't wait to read your thoughts. Until next time.